I lead our work nationally on the services that are delivered by our local minds, we are a federated network, so they're a network of 121 local organisations across England and Wales who are all separate organisations and support about 450,000 people in their communities. And my job is to support the development and the growth of the services that they deliver.
It says, why was the Green Agenda started, the ecotherapy, in 2007?
So I joined Mind in 2012 to manage a program that Mind had at the time called Eco Minds. So I wasn't around I wasn't at Mind in 2007, but I think why Mind came to look at the green environment and its relationship with mental health in 2007 was really about a kind of a growing understanding, I suppose, that I think implicitly we all know that being in nature and interacting with nature is good for us. Mm-hmm. And I think in 2007 Mind was doing some work, I think it was around predominantly around women's mental health, mm-hmm. But looking at kind of some of the factors, and that's where there was a growing movement to say, actually, how do we move some of this implicit knowledge that we all have about the value of green space in our recovery and our management and prevention, how do we move that into a more explicit space, and how do we actually potentially build the evidence and make a clearer case for it.
And also, since the inception of the Green Agenda, has there been any positive impact on the service users as a result of using ecotherapy as an alternative to traditional treatment strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would direct people to the report that we published in 2013. So from 2008 to 2012, we delivered a program called Eco Minds, which was funding from the National Lottery to fund 120 projects across England that were all about that interaction between green space and mental health in a huge variety of forms. And we published a report at the end of that, which looked at the impact of that, both from a qualitative point of view in terms of people's stories and the richness of people's experience, but also a quantitative point of view in terms of an evaluation that followed up with people on some validated scales of well-being and social connectivity. And on both fronts, there are some really positive stories about what ecotherapy has done for people in terms of their mental health and their well-being. So some really powerful stories about changes that people have made in their lives, but also some great data about how individuals had improved their well-being, for example. So that report is really the place to see, and that's just about Mind's work. Obviously, this is much bigger than Mind, and you can see a lot of the kind of the green space, the ecological organisations also active in this space. So I definitely encourage people to look at what the wildlife trusts are doing in this space, TCV, the National Trust, the Woodland Trust, etc., who all kind of talk about well-being as being one of the outcomes that you will achieve. Better well-being, I should say, will be one of the outcomes you will achieve by interacting with.
Before we move on, that this report in 2013, what's the name of it?
Feel better outside, feel better inside.
Okay.
So, but I can send it to you a copy.
Oh, okay. So feel better inside, feel better outside.
Or the other way around. Feel better outside, feel better inside. It's one of the two. It's definitely. So it's essentially a summary of the 120 projects, but it also pulls together a set of recommendations in terms of what we think should have been at that point in 2013 the next steps in terms of moving some of this forward. So it was wrapping up the program and saying, okay, where do we go after this?
Has ecotherapy been recognized as a clinically valid treatment for mental distress?
So I think it's a really good question. I think the answer is no in terms of the specificity of ecotherapy, but I think we should, just as a quick diversion, it does depend what we're talking about here, because ecotherapy as a term is used both incredibly broadly to mean any interaction with nature, but it also has quite a specific meaning in terms of a subset of interventions within that broad agenda of working with mental health and the green environment. So I don't believe that for example, NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Health Excellence, I don't believe that they necessarily recommend ecotherapy. What they do recommend, for example, though, for anyone who has mild to moderate depression and goes to see their GP, they should realistically be offered three things, an option of three things. One is a pharmaceutical solution, a drug. Secondly is talking therapy, so in England that will be IAPT. And the third thing is they should be encouraged to do moderate exercise. And I think where it fits in is with that third option around the idea that being physically active in nature is one of the positive ways to do that. So I don't think it's necessarily written into NICE's guidance, but it's certainly seen as a way of achieving that third option.
I think it's a university in Essex. They had said that they were looking at having the local PCTs and GPs kind of to write a prescription thing where they send people to these ecotherapy gardens or something. And so that then was only for that project research, and then it stopped there, I guess.
No. So I think it does happen. I think what, and I think you have a question further on about GPs and how GPs have recognised, or any staff that work in primary care. And I think what we found in 2013, or through the projects up to 2013, but what is certainly still true now, is that this relies quite heavily on having a GP or a group of GPs who really understand and get the value of the green environment, and therefore will encourage people to engage with the green environment and will see it as a benefit to their mental health. So the big shift, I suppose, we're seeing in the last few years in terms of the way that mental health services are delivered is around the growth of social prescribing. So the idea that when you go to your GP for certain mental health problems, that actually it's as valuable for the GP to suggest you get involved in some form of community provision as it is for you to receive drugs or talking treatments. And there are some great social prescribing schemes around the country, and a number of local minds are heavily involved in those. And being socially prescribed, for want of a better term, to go and spend some time in nature, or as you say, go to an eco garden or get involved in an allotment programme or whatever, is definitely something that happens in many areas across England, and I'm sure in Wales. But it's not necessarily something that is prescribed at a kind of a national.
Would mind be campaigning further for this to kind of encourage the NHS to look into it as an alternative? Because there was a report, I think the other day, that said that there is so much more people having depression, stress and so on, that is kind of becoming kind of an overwhelmment because there's not enough of infrastructure to support these individuals. So by going to this social prescribing that you're saying, which I guess when we say social prescribing would indicate ecotherapy
As
prescribing.
Absolutely.
So that might be a way, because this study in 2007 found that there was a really positive outcome.
So I think, and this is certainly not the part of the organisation. I work on the services side, not on the campaigning side. But in terms of our campaign messages that we put out in 2013 at the end of the EcoMinds programme, we would stand by those campaign messages, and we would certainly say that ecotherapy or access to green space should be a part of someone's recovery journey. I think we would probably, at the moment, we're not making necessarily, we're not doing proactive campaigning around green space, but I think we are continuing to campaign around choice and around the fact that people should have the option to be involved in something that they feel is appropriate for them. And then I think that over time we may campaign more around something like social prescribing and kind of almost the mechanism, as opposed to the end point. So for us, it's important that people are supported properly through social prescribing to get involved in the activity that will be beneficial to their mental health, be that activity an art class, a dance class, a sports session, or green space in itself. So at the moment, I think we don't necessarily proactively campaign around green spaces, but very much around them being part of a bigger picture for people. But there is definitely a growing interest from government in the value of green space, and DEFRA, so the government department responsible for the environment is funding at the moment some further pilots looking at social prescribing and green space. So it feels a bit like it's coming back onto the agenda.
Ecotherapy, since its inception in 2007, shown clear and measurable evidence that when the service users interacted with nature, that their mental well-being improved.
The answer is yes. I think, again, I would point people to Mind's report in 2013. Feel better outside, feel better inside, possibly the other way around, where that was a study of over 12,000 individuals who were involved in the EcoMinds programme. The evaluation was conducted by the University of Essex, so an independent organisation, and showed genuine improvements in people's well-being, for example. There are a range of other studies out there that have also proved the benefit. I think it is still an open debate as to the quality of that evidence and the scale of that evidence, and I think there is always need for more evidence. But I think it is also true that to a certain degree people buy the argument that it is beneficial for people's well-being.
In 2007, when the Green Agenda Ecotherapy started, that there was some reluctance from health and social care professionals that a walk in the countryside or participation in a green gym would have the same sort of therapeutic status as psychiatric medication or psychological therapies. Where do you stand on that view?
So I think this ties into some of the answers I gave previously, that I think we are highly reliant in this space on individuals, whether GPs or other staff in primary care. We're highly reliant on individuals to understand and kind of get this as a message. And I certainly think we have moved on since 2007. And we did do as part of that report that I mentioned previously, we did poll GPs in 2013 and asked them whether they would be prepared to prescribe green space as a viable alternative. And there was a fairly mixed view at that point as to whether they would do that, and there were some interesting views about whether it was something that actually was the issue that they wouldn't do it, or that individuals didn't want it, and I think there's some challenges in that. So I think and I should say, in the growth of social prescribing and the general move in the NHS towards personalised care, I think we're seeing we've certainly seen movement since 2007 in individuals recognising that value. So I'm sure there will still be individuals within primary care, but I'm sure there'll still be individuals within society generally who wouldn't say that the green environment could be beneficial. But I think we've moved a lot on, and I think a lot more people would recognise that it has a place. And whether that place is as a replacement for drugs or talking therapies, or whether it actually is a complement that works alongside, that's I guess another question. But I think we've definitely moved on since that view in 2007.
Is the Green Agenda Ecotherapy still a strategic implementation by the Primary Care Trust and local health boards? If not, what is Mind doing to make this a possibility?
It's a good question. So I should say also that the primary care trusts don't exist anymore.
Oh, right.
No, that's fine. The structure of the NHS is myriad and complicated.
Okay.
But in terms of the CCGs, the clinical commissioning groups, and then the larger STPs, strategic transformation partnerships, I think the question is probably, the answer is a bit of both. In some areas, they will no doubt recognise the value of green space, and in others they won't. And in some it will be written into their plans, and in others it won't. Again, I think from Mind's point of view, our position at this point would be if people were interested in green space, we would point them to the recommendations that we made in 2013, and we would say to commissioners or to those setting health and wellbeing strategies, here's the evidence, here's why we think you should include it. I think our bigger message would be about choice and about making sure that people had the option if that was something that they were interested in. So we will continue to sort of campaign on that basis, I think.
In 2007, Mind proposed a 10-point plan to provide a framework for ecotherapy on the mental health policy and service provision. Has this made an impact on the establishment of ecotherapy for the day-to-day lives of the service users or those that help facilitate the ecotherapy?
So I guess this is one area where I'm not 100% sure because of 2007. But I guess what I can say is that the 10-point, the call that we made in 2007 led directly to Mind securing an investment from the big lottery, which over the life of the program from 2008 to 2012 was about £10.5 million investment that the big lottery made in this space, which was part of a wider program actually that was much bigger and also was all in the kind of green space. But that £10.5 million investment, which Mind then distributed to 120 organisations across England, was a direct result of that 10-point plan and led to things like the report that I've mentioned and some of the kind of subsequent projects that still continue. So I think I couldn't say on the specifics of those 10-point plan, but I think you can see a natural journey in terms of Mind making a campaign ask, which led to the country's biggest grant funder making a commitment to this space, which led to 120 projects that supported over 12,000 people in their communities. So I think you can see some real positive benefits for that, and I suppose the wider benefit of people reading that report, thinking about how they can implement it in their lives or their work, etc. And to be frank, conversations like this, the project ended sort of actively for mine. The project ended about 6.5 years ago, and yet we still have these kind of conversations because I think green therapy really, or the environment and mental health really touches a nerve with people, and people tend to really understand it and kind of want to explore it further.
And has the establishment of ecotherapy gardens helped to destigmatize those with mental distress and help the service users feel more socially included?
I think it's a really good question. I think there are probably two answers. One on the specifics of ecotherapy and one a bit more broadly around stigma itself. Starting with the broad, so Mind has run a campaign now for over 10 years in partnership with another mental health, a leading mental health organisation called Rethink, called Time to Change. So we've run an anti-stigma campaign for the last 10 years, which has been about encouraging people to talk about mental health. And I think it is inarguable that campaign has been a success and as part of a wider push for mental health to be destigmatised as something, as you say, that people are comfortable talking about, but perhaps as importantly, comfortable seeking support for. It's not to say that it's perfect, and it's not to say that stigma doesn't still exist, but the Times Change campaign has some fantastic evidence of the change in attitude that it has achieved, and also has been part of a wider shift in the mental health landscape. And we see that at Mind with our recent partnership, for example, with the English Football League, where our logo is now on the back of every football club shirt in the country. To think that we will be encouraging men at football grounds to talk about mental health just 5 years ago is a huge shift. So I think there has been a huge shift in destigmatising mental health over the last 10 years. On the specifics of ecotherapy, the evaluation of EcoMinds in 2013, and again it's in the report, shows that one of the biggest things we achieved was that people who attended the ecotherapy services felt more connected to their communities, and they felt able to engage more in their communities, and interestingly also ecotherapy engaged more men than it did women. And I think it's an interesting challenge that men are particularly hard to, often particularly hard to engage in services, and sometimes face some of the largest stigma. So we didn't study, and I'm not aware of a study of how individuals, outside individuals, viewed those in ecotherapy gardens, but as a kind of a proxy for that, the fact that individuals who took place felt more able to engage in their community would suggest that they felt the stigma from their point of view was lessening. So I think that's a really positive picture to report.
Has there been an increase in the number of GPs who prescribe green activities as a treatment for mental health? If so, can you name a couple of the GPs that are currently using ecotherapy as part of their treatment for mental health disorders? And if not, what has been done to promote
Unfortunately not. I mean, not directly. So it would be hard to say if there's been an increase, because I don't believe there's ever been a study that shows a baseline for how many there were.
Yeah.
There are certainly, you can certainly see studies that have, projects that have done this. So one of the projects that we funded was a social prescribing scheme in Penrith, in the Lake District, which was about GPs prescribing the green environment. And I know, for example, there is a project that the Wildlife Trusts run in Lancashire, which is also about kind of the access to the Wildlife Trust space that comes directly via referrals from primary care. So there are absolutely examples of where it works. But in terms of an increase, I couldn't necessarily say. In terms of what's being done about it, I think it goes back to that question of social prescribing and giving people the choice and I suppose the confidence to say to their GP or whoever it is they're talking about their mental health, this is something that I'd like to try, or this is something that I think would be beneficial. This could be either a replacement or a complement to the more traditional services. So again, I think that's something that there is, so within the NHS long-term plan, so the recently announced plan and funding that the government put for the long-term plan, and within that there was quite a sizable commitment to mental health. The NHS long-term plan commits the NHS to having over 1,000 link workers in primary care services, which is about linking individuals from primary care into that community offer. And I'm sure a percentage of that link will be into green space environment. And I know that some of the green space charities, like the Wildlife Trust, for example, are campaigning quite heavily to say, actually, how do we make sure that those link workers are sort of trained and aware of the benefits of the environment so they can be making those links. So I think there's work going on through that angle to push forward that agenda.
Okay, that's interesting. Just drawing back on that mention of link workers, as I didn't pick it up from my research. When are they starting, or have they started, and are they coming directly from Mind or from the NHS?
So it's a commitment that the NHS made in the long-term plan to a link worker per primary care network, which is we were talking earlier about the CCGs and the STPs. The primary care network is the kind of the smallest collective of commissioning power, and it's and as I said, the long-term plan commits the NHS to funding. So this is coming from the NHS, over 1,000 link workers across England. Where those primary care where those link workers will come from is a good question. Some of them will, I imagine, be staff that are already in primary care, so it'll be someone that they will employ. Some of them, we've already started to see the recruitment of some of these. Some of them they are asking the voluntary sector to recruit those staff. So in Buckinghamshire Mind, one of our local mines, has recruited a number of them. And in other areas it will be done differently. So the model will be different, but it's about providing a link between primary care services and the community, of which I imagine the environment will be a big part.
Is Mind involved in facilitating an increase in the number of local Mind groups offering green activities to their service users and local communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I sent you a list last week. I can't remember how many on that list, but there was probably between 15 and 20 local minds across England and Wales who report. So they report to us on a quarterly basis on what services they offer on a range of data. And there's about 15 to 20 who are offering some form of green space intervention. And we will facilitate on a range of service areas, not just green space, but obviously green space in this context. We will facilitate the sharing of good practice between the network, learning from each other, visiting each other, how they respond to certain tender opportunities that this might be relevant to. So yeah, absolutely, we've got local minds doing this, and we're keen to actively support them to do this. And for example, we have quite a large program around the benefits of physical activity generally, so more broadly than the green environment, and somewhere between sort of 60 and 70 local minds. 60 or 70 local minds out of 121 offer some form of physical activity, and I imagine a lot of that is classified as physical activity but happens in green space. So there's probably actually a larger number that deliver this, but it's kind of how you classify it. But we're keen to support any of that local minds do, because as long as they're kind of responding to the needs of their local community and being driven by what people with lived experience of mental health problems want, then that's absolutely what they should be doing.
Then be termed as the green gyms, I think, is what the 2007 research showed. Okay.
So the green gym, it's interesting. Green gym is actually a trademark term that's owned by an organisation called TCV, the Conservation Volunteers. TCV deliver a model of green gym which is about individuals getting involved in a structured program which involves an element of physical activity, an element of kind of socialisation, but also a focus heavily on kind of the benefits on people's mental health within that. And it's they license that model to a range of organisations across the country. I can't remember how many they've got, but I think it was in the hundreds of that they were delivering. So the Green Gym, I suppose, is one specific model that is owned by TCV.
Okay.
But there are a plethora of models across the local mind network, not least, if not across other organisations. So when I said that between 15 and 20 local minds were delivering green therapy, that will be anything from kind of quite specific programs potentially for specific audiences, all the way through to allotment services, food growing, walks in nature, lots of different kind of services, but all with that under the umbrella of kind of being beneficial for people's mental health.
Oh, fantastic. And this was kind of like a catalyst from the 2007 research on the green agenda?
Certainly the work that Mind has done, yes. I mean, I think TCV have been a big player in this space for many years before that, because their agenda, so the Conservation Volunteers is kind of in their name, that their mission is about connecting people with nature. So they were a big part of the EcoMinds program that I mentioned. We funded them to do some specific work around the green gym and mental health. But so I think Mind's work is certainly a catalyst to 2007. But I don't think we'd want to claim that started all of this. As I said, it was all in. A lot of people had the same idea that this was something we could do more to move from the kind of implicit to the explicit.
As part of the green agenda, is Mind actively encouraging establishments such as the Wildlife Trust to create more green spaces? But I think you touched on that. But in terms of planting more trees and other plants and so on, because the reason I ask this is that most areas that I've seen is that there's less trees. It's more like just things that have been cut. And then if you see any trees, it's pretty much like one or two.
Yeah.
And it's not more like a forest type of thing. It's just more like a picnicking area than nature reserve as you would think nature reserve should be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We get asked fairly infrequently, but we have been asked in the past to comment on, I guess, the quality of green space, because probably all green space is not equal. It's not really it's certainly not my expertise, and I don't think it's mine's expertise to comment on how green spaces should be managed, or, as you say, whether more trees should be planted. Our work here is to ensure that organisations like the Wildlife Trust or the Woodland Trust, they are the experts in the management of the green space. We are the experts in why green space is beneficial to people's mental health or to their well-being. So I think we would work in partnership with those organisations for that. I think, and I can't remember the details, but I think there is actually there has been a study which picks up on what you've talked about here, which is that all green space is not equal, and that some green space, probably being in any green space is better than nothing, but actually some green space is an urban park, for example, that may have a couple of benches, and some green space is the Lake District, which is quite a different, quite different ends of the spectrum. And I think there has been some studies looking at, when we talk about the benefits of green space, how green does that space actually have to be. I should also say there's a lot of studies into blue spaces, so coastal areas as well, that fits into this.
Impart your advice or what you have, I don't know, in your experience?
I think I would, I think I would close with I guess what I've been trying to say throughout this, that I think what the evidence shows is that green space is absolutely beneficial to people's mental health, and that where appropriate it should be part of someone's management or recovery or even prevention of their mental health, and that individuals should not feel unable, I suppose, to make it part of that through choice.